Hello chaps, welcome to John Robson Guitar Tuition. I hope you're well. Just a quick little video today to show you how I go about putting together a drum track. Let's get on with it then. Okay, here we go. As you can see, I've set up the DAW. I've loaded a drum kit and I'm in the piano roll view where we do all the MIDI programming. The first thing I've done is a count-in bar on a basic sort of cross stick sound, you know, kind of a 1, 2, 3, 4 lead in. I've just done that on, as I say, kind of a cross stick kind of sound. As I'm doing the programming here, the audio isn't going to be fantastic. I'm afraid all you're hearing is the audio coming out of the monitors and going into the microphone that I'm speaking into at the moment. But at the end of each particular section you'll hear it in better quality, so don't worry about that. Right, the first thing I need to do to get a bit of a drum loop going is put in a bass drum, and I'm going to do that on beat 1 and beat 3 of this bar here. Okay, I'm also going to add a bass drum on the back end of beat 2, so that's going to be on the and of the 2. Next thing is we want a snare drum on beats 2 and 4 like this, and then that will, you know, it'll kind of work. It'll sound a little bit mechanical though, because all of the velocities are identical. The velocities are shown on these vertical lines at the bottom of the screen here, and basically they represent how hard the drum is being hit, and it's highly unlikely that any human drummer would hit everything precisely the same velocity or even want to. I'm going to take this bass drum on the second part of beat 2 and just reduce the velocity to about there on that one. I'm going to take the velocity on the bass drum on beat 3 and just take it down a hair's breadth like that, more to just affect the slightly affect the tone of the drum than the volume. And the same thing again with the velocity on beat 2 of the snare drum like that, and that will give me a pretty good template to use as a bass and snare pattern. The next thing I need to do is add some hi-hats, and I always forget up here which is the hi-hat key, so I'm just going to hit and hope. No, that's a tom, but never mind, we'll drag it until it's a hi-hat. There it is, that's now a hi-hat. And let's set up a basic kind of quaver based hi-hat rhythm like that. And the reason why I've done this in the next bar rather than the same bar as the drums is because I want to be able to mess with the velocities a little bit with these as well. Usually rock music we tend to have an accent on beats 2 and 4, so I'm going to really put a big peak on the velocity on beat 2 and on beat 4 like that. And now I have a basic hi-hat pattern which I can marry up with the bass and snare patterns simply by dragging it over like that. That then gives me a nice little loop that I can copy and paste. All I'm doing here is just selecting the pattern that I've created, Control C on the keyboard to copy and Control V to paste. I now have a nice little 4-bar loop with a 1-bar count in, which is going to sound like this. Okay, the next thing I need to do is just add a couple of little landmarks to that, just to break it up a little bit. And the first thing I guess we need to do is to go back to the beginning of bar 1 and put a crash cymbal in. I'm going to take this hi-hat here and there we go, just drag it until it becomes a crash cymbal. The other thing I like to do with that is to stretch it out across the full width of the bar. The reason I do that is more of a visual thing than anything else. When I'm in the kind of midst of programming, it's just handy to be able to quickly glance and see where the beginning of each 4-bar lump of drums is. At the end of that 4-bar lump I'm going to put in a little drum fill. So the first thing I do is get rid of the drums that are in there already. Let's shorten this bass drum back to here. So what I've got here is the second half of beat 3 and all of beat 4 that I can use to build up a drum fill. Let's do that by putting in a couple of semi-quaver snare drums, a rim shot on the beginning of beat 4, maybe another one, and then a tom there like that. We'll just stretch that out so it fills up the rest of the beat. Another nice little trick I like to do when going into a drum fill is just to simulate a bit of a drum roll. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to the snap to grid, there it is, and I'm going to take that from 16th or semi-quaver down to a 32nd note, which is basically 1/8 of a beat, and this final snare drum here on the back end of beat 3 I'm shortening so that it's now a 32nd note, and then put another one in like that. Okay, and that will work as a drum fill, but it will still sound a little bit mechanical because we need to alter the velocities. And a really handy little trick that I use for altering the velocity is to draw a tick. There we go, just draw a little tick like that on the velocities, and we now have a 4-bar loop of drums, including the count in bar, which will sound like this. Right, so that's effectively the first half of the first verse of a tune. So how do I get the second half of that verse? Simple. I just select it all like that. I'm using the select tool over here, obviously, to select. And once again, copy and paste into the beginning of the next bar, like that. Now then, what I've got there is 2 identical 4-bar loops of drums, and I don't want them to be identical because it becomes a bit of a giveaway that it's just been copied and pasted. So the easiest way for me to modify that is to go to the end and modify that fill, so we have a different fill each time. Little trick I use for that is to kind of, you can see this begins halfway through beat 3, so I'm just going to move it forward, get rid of the drums that are in the way. Again, select it and drag it and drop it across until it now begins halfway through beat 4. Beat 2 rather, leaving me beat 4 to fill up. And here's a lovely little kind of technique I use to kind of do this. I'm just going to put a single snare drum in on beat 4, and then any other event. It could be a tom, it could be a hi-hat, it could be anything. In this particular drum kit here, the key above the snare drum is blank, it doesn't do anything, so I'm just going to put a blank event in there. Then zoom in as far as I can go and take the snap to grid off. Okay, so now I can be deliberately inaccurate, which is what I'm trying to do. See, I can move that backwards and forwards and it's not kind of quantizing to any particular value. And I just want to drag that slightly ahead of the beat, about that much should do. And then with this one here, drag it slightly below the beat, behind the beat rather. Okay, so this one here, this is the blank event that doesn't really sound like anything at the moment, and this is the snare drum. Okay, and if I put the snap to grid back on, you can see that there is the beat, and both of these events are slightly either side of it. And then let's take this blank event and move it back down to where the snare drum is, and then I've got sort of 2 snare hits that are kind of slightly either side of the beat. It simulates the sound of a drummer doing like a double sticking kind of thing. You're basically hitting the drum with 2 sticks a fraction of a second apart. Now then, here's where the drum fill begins, and once again draw my velocity tick. There it is, and we now have a second 4 bars of drums, which sounds like this. Do you hear that double sticking kind of effect on that final snare drum? It really, I think, adds just an air of humanity to it. Anyway, let's move on now and have a look at how we're going to do the next verse. Okay, so to do the next verse, basically the simplest thing to do, I guess, is just shrink the view down like that and copy that entire first verse worth of drums. Again, just select around them using the select tool, Control C on the keyboard to copy them, and just make sure that my cursor's in the right place. There it is, and Control V to paste them. I now have two identical verses worth of drums, and we don't want them identical. I could mess with the fills a little bit again, but you've seen already how I do that, so I'm not going to bother. I'm going to show you another technique now that I would usually use in conjunction with varying the fills a little bit, but this also has quite a big effect. We're basically going to modify these hi-hats here. At the moment we've got like a kind of a pedal hi-hat and a closed hi-hat with a stick alternating on quavers. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that they're all on the same key like that, so they're all effectively now kind of the same thing. And then once I've got them all in the same place like that, I'm going to take them and modify them by dragging and dropping them up to the point where they are now open hi-hats. Okay, so let's just hear that in context. As I say, I would normally kind of do this and alter the fills as well, but you've already seen how I kind of modify the drum fills at the end of each 4-bar loop. Let's have a listen to both verses worth of drums, the first with the kind of closed hi-hat and the second with the open hi-hat. Sounds like this. Right, the next thing to do then is to create a contrasting drum pattern for what would effectively be the chorus of the song. If I take a look at the bass and snare pattern which I've used on the verse, you can see I've got a bass drum on beat 1 of the bar, on the end of beat 2 and on beat 3. So first thing I'm going to do is make sure I don't reproduce that on the chorus. Let's start with a bass drum on beat 1. That's just a little bit off there, so let's kind of tighten it up a bit. There we go. So I've got a bass drum on beat 1. One thing I haven't done in the verse part of the song is I haven't used semiquavers on the basic drum part, only in the fills. So I'm going to put another bass drum on the last semiquaver of beat 1, like that. And then we'll stick a bass drum on beat 3 and on the end of beat 3, and as ever a snare drum on beat 2 and on beat 4. So once again, let's just mess with the velocities a little bit there. Let's take this bass drum on the last semiquaver of beat 1 and take the velocity down a bit for that, and the same thing for the bass drum on the back end of beat 3. Having trouble getting my words out. Let's take the snare on beat 2 and take that up a little bit. Now that's a basic template that I can work with. Now let's do some cymbals. For the chorus I will probably go on to a ride cymbal rather than a hi-hat. So let's just do again a basic sort of quaver pattern on ride cymbals, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and like that. And as ever, just mess with the velocity a little bit, remembering to put an accent on beat 2 and on beat 4, like that. There it is. Let's marry that up with the bass and snare pattern, just drag it across. There we go. I now have a basic chorus template drum pattern, which again I'll just copy and paste into a 4-bar loop like this. There we go. There's me 4 bars worth of chorus drums. As always, take the first cymbal event on that loop and turn it into a crash cymbal. There it is, and drag it out so it fills the whole bar. At the other end of that 4-bar loop, let's put in just a little fill. Make some space for it first of all. And let's take, so that's a snare drum now, and let's turn that into semi-quavers and rim shot. It does have a nice rim shot sound, this kit, so I tend to use it probably a little bit too much. There we go, just a couple of rim shots lasting half a beat each. Let's do that little drum roll kind of thing again on this snare, so down to a 30-second note. There it is, and once again that's where my drum fill starts, so let's do the old velocity tick like that. There it is. That then gives me 4 bars worth of chorus drums, so let's do the second half of the 8-bar chorus just by doing a copy and paste on those. There it is. Modify this fill at the end again. Now, again, the trick that I often use to just save myself some time really is to just take the fill that I've already got and drag it over a little bit. So I'm going to take, just made some space for it there, this fill here, which starts halfway through beat 3, and it's now going to start halfway through beat 2. Let's turn this rim shot here into a tom like that, and then just go back to some kind of semi-quaver thing on snare drums and rim shot. There it is. Drum fill starts here, so do the tick. There it is, and we now have some chorus drums, which you're going to hear in decent quality audio right now. Here they are. And here's the whole thing. Count from the count-in bar through both verses and the chorus. The first thing I'll do though is I'll put a little bass drum and crash cymbal in on the end, just as an ending basically, like that. Okay, so here's the whole thing. And there you have it. That's how I put together a drum part. Obviously, given a little bit more time, I would probably finesse it a bit more and add a few more variations, but you've seen the kind of process that I use, so hopefully you could fill in the gaps yourself and come up with your own ideas in order to do that. If you're looking for some tuition either on guitar or any kind of music making related matters, then give me a shout. I do lessons via Skype, or if you live on Teesside on the northeast of England, then why not get in touch and come along for some one-to-one tuition. You can find the contact details at the end of this video. And while I'm here, I'll just take this opportunity to give a plug for my current album. It's out on iTunes, Amazon, Spotify, all the usual places basically. It's called The Whiskey Made Me Do It, and if you're a fan of shreddy blues rock guitar with big melodies, then check it out. I think you're going to like it. And with that, I'll bid you good day, and we'll see you all again next time. Bye for now, folks.